Aloha. My name is Doug, and I have the privilege of being one of your retired missionaries here at International. Trevor, I was right there with you. I get it. Because we have a history at this church, too, that goes back to 1971. Most of you weren't alive. Or even thought of. But it was in January of that year that I first walked in that door as a brand new believer. And I was led to Christ by Dick and Ann Abel, and they picked me up, brought me to church, because they said, that's what you should do. And I said, okay, whatever we should do, let's do it. And she was very excited for me to meet the pastor, Jim Cook, at that time, because she said, he's a football nut just like you. I said, great, looking forward to it. And as we were handed the bulletin out there in the area that's now beautifully covered, Ann looked at it, and she stopped dead in her tracks, and she whirled around, and she goes, oh, no. And I thought, what happened? And she says, Dick, Jim is not speaking today. It's some missionary. I had no idea what a missionary was, nor did I ever think I would become one. But we learned both of those things. And to have been in that church, been coming to this church then for 6 months of 1971 before I left for college. And then 2 years later, we returned, and I brought a wife with me. And Leanne and I came, and we're here for 3 years at International, at the college, and at the church. And those were the years that we learned to either be champions for Jesus Christ or just get out of the way. We had the choice. What are you going to do? Which one of those do you want? And we said, we want to be champions for Jesus Christ. And this church has been a part of praying for us ever since, as we went to Austria as missionaries. So, your pastor Scott gave me the opportunity to preach while he was in India, and then one last time as he gets back and gets over some jet lag. So you guys know where we are. We're in Luke chapter 15. And so today we're going to finally finish the greatest short story ever told. It only took Jesus 388 words to tell the greatest story ever told. It took me 3 weeks to get through it. It's a story of redemption in 3 perfect parables. We're on the home stretch, and so let's back up a few verses so that we can get the background, we get the context for the interaction between the father and the older son, which is where we're going to be today. So in verse 20, Jesus said this. So the younger son, he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But he didn't get to finish the rest of his rehearsed story. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. They fired up the Weber, and they began to dance, celebrate, eat, do what they do for this kind of a party. It's a lot. The father's reaction to this was so stunning. We talked about that at length last week. But it kind of reminds us of many of the Psalms. One of them is Psalm 86:4, which says, O Lord, You are so good and so ready to forgive, so full of unfailing love for all who ask for your forgiveness. So we've got that scene. My goodness, the party has started. The guests have been arriving. And anybody who seemingly had the stature that this father had, he had an estate, he had servants working for him, and he probably invited the whole community, whatever that looked like. But let's remind ourselves of the action plan of the younger son. What was the problem he was intent on solving? What was the issue that brought him back home? He was starving to death. Remember that? He was starving. He said, I am so hungry. There are hired servants at my father's house that have more than enough food to eat, and here I am, shrinking away, feeding pigs. So he came up with a plan of how to go back home, hopefully get a job, and get something to eat. As far as we know, that's what he was after. He never would have dreamed of the reception he got in the first moments of his father seeing him. So his plan was this: please take me on as a hired servant. So that's what he thought, he could get a job. That's somewhat contrite, but he was still intent then on earning his way into his father's approval. His plan, though, was made irrelevant by the lavish grace of his father. Robe, ring, sandals, barbecue. So the party began. Incredible. But now the scene changes to the older brother, a man who had lost touch with reality. Because we're going to see that this older brother thought he was this, and he was that. Scott and I had the opportunity several years ago to go to a leadership conference which was held in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, right on the battlefield. And for 3 days, we learned about principles of leadership from the battle and from the Bible. I've been to a handful or more of leadership conferences. This was the best by far. But one of the things we learned at that thing in Gettysburg those days was reality is your friend. And in military conflict, you got to know exactly what you're up against. You got to know exactly what your resources are. You got to know if what you had done earlier is working so that you can do what you want to do now. Reality. You don't want junior officers telling you what they think you want to hear. That's going to lose the battle and get many, many people killed. Reality is your friend. What is our situation? Where am I really? What are my resources, and how do I get where I really want to go? You got to start with a real assessment. And this older brother wasn't anywhere near a real assessment. It would have been normal for an older brother in this family and in this culture, in that Jewish tight family entity that they had, and this is the first century, it would have been normal for the older brother to say, Father, what has happened, what our younger brother's done is a scandal, and I am going to do what I can to fix it. And the older brother should have gone in search of the younger. Brought him home. Helped reconcile relationships that were broken. That's typically what you would expect from an older brother. This guy did not lift a finger to bring back the younger brother. He wasn't interested in doing that. Even though he now had 2/3 of the estate, because that's what he inherited at the time that his younger brother demanded his inheritance. So, verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants, "What's going on?" "Your brother is back," he was told, "and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return." Now, if all this had really happened and we were watching a movie that they made of it, it would be right at this point that this movie would definitely earn its R rating. Yeah, because the older brother would have unleashed a torrent of bad words, expressing how he felt about his younger brother returning, and there's a party going on. You gotta be kidding me. Notice, let's notice something as we begin this interaction between the older brother and the father. Notice that he attempts to distance himself from everyone in his family. Verse 28. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. Think of that. His father came out and begged him. But he replied, "Look, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never gave me even a young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet, when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf?" He addresses his own father by saying, "Look." Incredible rudeness. Totally unacceptable in that day. You did not address your father by anything other than father. "Look, you, I've been slaving for you." So he's kind of insinuating, you're just the slave master and I've been the slave. Well, dude, you've owned the entire estate now for quite some time, ever since the younger brother's been gone, by the way. So you were working for yourself. Pretty blatant lie. These are jarring violations of culture. And then he says this, "Never once have I refused to do a single thing you told me to do." I just want to smack him upside the head and say, "Really? Would you like to repeat that again? Because I just heard him beg you to come in and join the celebration, and you refused. And you stand there and say, I've never refused to do a thing you've ever told me to do. I don't think this was the first time, do you?" This guy has lost touch with reality. He doesn't get who he is. He doesn't have any more respect for his father, certainly not for his younger brother. And his own self-righteousness is coming out in lies and innuendos and probably body language, but I can't see it. The older brother thought that his attendance and his obedience kept the father obligated to him. That's what he was hoping was the case. But then dad goes and throws a party for the younger brother and kills the fatted calf, and I'm out in the field dinking around and I don't know anything about it. I thought I was in charge here. Dad, what do you think you're doing? Look, he said. Well, how does the story end? Well, we finally get to hear from the father. The father clearly refused to let the older brother get away with his relationship distancing language. He starts out, the father said to him, look. Isn't that incredible? He used the same word. That he's dad. And he probably said it in the most gracious, humble way, but definitely making a point. You said that to me, but look. He says, look, dear son. So don't forget who I am and who you are. Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. Totally true. Then he says, but we had to celebrate this happy day for your brother, not that son of mine. He's your brother. Your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. Notice that the father does a couple of, there's 3 points here that I think it's great for us to capture, okay? The father confirmed his attendance. Yeah, he said, you've always been with me. That much is true. The father confirmed his inheritance. All that I have left is yours. But the father did not confirm his claim of obedience, did he? But he says we had to celebrate. We had to celebrate. I think the father wanted to join the angels in heaven who absolutely throw a party whenever a sinner repents. And that's what we have here. I got to thinking about that. You know, these party angels, these angels in heaven in the presence of God who rejoice, and we add the throw a party idea. Jesus said they rejoiced whenever a sinner repents. I got to thinking, are they doing that constantly? I hope so. I hope that's the case. So I looked up research from the Barna Group and tried to find out what's the best estimate of how many people put their trust and faith in Jesus Christ each year. And they also were interested in that statistic, and they did some searching, and they found out that an average guess is about that 68,000 people a year put their trust in Jesus Christ. 68,000. And so that breaks down into 47 per minute. These angels don't get much of a break, do they? Praise the Lord. They're busy. Let's make them busier. So, let's take a look at the older brother's assumption of acceptance. And he was exactly the same as the scribes and the Pharisees earlier in the account. The older brother's assumption was this. He says, all these years I've slaved for you. In other words, I've kept the rules. Apparently, it doesn't matter about attitude. Attitude, respectfulness, didn't matter. I kept the rules. I was here. I even kept some of the rules we made up. You know, there's this story in Matthew chapter 19 about a rich young ruler. Now, Jesus was near the end of his ministry, so What he had been teaching was spread throughout the nation, and his popularity had grown to a great extent, or the hatred of him was growing to that incredible level too. But this rich young ruler showed up, stood apparently on the edges while Jesus was teaching, and then walked up to him and says, "Teacher, what must I do to gain eternal life?" That is a great question. That is the question for all of us. What must I do to gain eternal life? Notice there's a "do" in there. Well, surprisingly, for me anyway, Jesus listed off 6 commandments. He says, you got to do this, and this. And the rich young ruler says, I've done all that. What do I still lack? I've done all those things, Jesus. What do I still lack? Then Jesus says, well, if you want to be perfect, go and sell all your possessions and give to the poor and follow me. There's the answer to the question. Follow Jesus. Did he do it? No. That rich young ruler turned and went away, very unhappy, because he did not like the answer to that question. The older brother's assumption about acceptance was similar to the rich young ruler and very similar to the Pharisees and scribes. The second thing he thought was, through his years of work, he had earned a place of honor. These sinners had earned no such status. The ones Jesus was teaching originally, the ones the Pharisees said to him, Jesus, what are you doing? Why you welcome these, you even eat with them. They thought their work, I kind of wondered now what exactly was the work of the Pharisees? What did they do? Well, they were basically puppet leaders in Israel underneath Roman domination. There was a self-righteousness in the older brother, in the Pharisees and the scribes, that just explodes out of them. Self-righteousness is a totally debilitating disease. It turns you into your own doctor, declaring yourself to be the finest that humanity has to offer. In reality, self-righteousness keeps you away from grace and will utterly destroy you. I have the pleasure, the privilege from a sovereign God of dealing with multiple sclerosis. I have MS. Most of the time, there's no way you would know that if I didn't tell you, unless you watch me for a few days walk crookedly down the street or get fatigued way too early. The main symptom I have is my left leg is completely numb and my left hand is completely numb. So I can't feel anything through those 2 appendages. But that's kind of like the self-righteous person. He's lost contact with the ability to receive information. It's a dangerous thing to not be able to feel something with your left foot. What if you step on glass? What if you step on something hot? I won't know it. But a self-righteous person runs into grace and they don't even know what to do with it. They don't know what it is. They can't handle it the same way I can't handle receptors in those legs and that hand anymore. Finally, the older brother's assumption of acceptance was this last point. Both the older brother and the Pharisees were repulsed by the Father's and Jesus' lavish grace. Remember, that's what they walked up and found when Jesus was showing grace to the tax collectors and the notorious sinners. And then the Father shows grace to the younger brother as he returned that is, I agree, it's inconceivable. It's truly amazing. He was so offended, so disrespected, so maltreated by his younger son, and yet as soon as he saw him coming, he ran and fell on his neck, kissed him, and welcomed him. Didn't even let him get his speech out. He just said, nope, robe, ring, sandals, food. Grace is disgusting for the self-righteous because it doesn't hold people accountable for their actions, and it does not reward me for the good works that I've done, hoping they will save me. Grace is amazing, but for the self-righteous, it's repulsive. You know, the two brothers weren't that different. The two brothers were pretty much alike, and I've got a few points that I think demonstrate that. They both were more interested in the Father's things than in having a loving and gracious relationship with their Father. They wanted his stuff. They wanted Dad's stuff. They didn't want Dad. And even when the older brother says, you never once gave me a goat to have a party with my friends, and oh, by the way, you're not invited. Secondly, they showed serious contempt for each other. Comes across in their actions and in their lack of communication, not in direct verses. Number three, they thought the Father judged them solely on their works. Dad's going to love us and accept us based on what we accomplish. And I'll bet there's a lot of us in this room right now who says, yeah, that was my earthly father too. I picked that up real fast. That the love and the words of praise and the words of affirmation came readily when I excelled at something, when I did something they really liked. And we tend to think God does the same thing. People, he does not. He does not. Remember, Jesus was interrupted and criticized for teaching and eating with these tax collectors and sinners. He doesn't respond in kind, but he immediately tells three amazing parables. And we go, wait, what? You mean the first parable and second parable are absolutely critical to the third? Yes. In the first parable, something wandered off and was lost. In the second parable, something stayed at home and was lost. And then Jesus tells about these two sons. The father had two sons. And what did one son do? And what did the other son do? See, because before Jesus even started to talk about the father and his sons, Luke says this. To make his point further, he says, so Jesus had made his point after the parable of the coin. Well, what about you and me? The first and second parables are happy ever after stories, but brilliantly foreshadow the characteristics and the character in the third parable. The final parable focuses his listeners then and now to ask the question, Is he talking about me? Do you see yourself anywhere in this story? Are you a lot like the younger brother? He knew what was right, but he went the other way. He made so many bad choices. Then he thought, I have to work my way back to God. And maybe you thought that. Maybe you thought, I don't know what the standard is, but I'm probably short of it. I gotta get going here. I must make amends, but these actions will not save you. Then you hear the truth. Just like the younger son hears this incredible, lavish grace from his father, you and I, who were like younger brothers, we're overwhelmed by the love and the grace of God. We're overwhelmed by the story that, you're on your way to a hell. You're on your way to a Christless eternity, but Christ has made a way so that does not happen. He forgave everything and made you his own child. Wow, that's the first part of the story of the sons. Good works spring from gratefulness of becoming his child. They are not the things that you do to try to get saved or stay saved. But that's the younger brother. But some of us are like the other guy. Some of us are like the older brother. The older brother knew the right thing to do, but he busied himself with other good things. With other good things. He thought that attendance is really what mattered. Hey, I'm here. Regular churchgoers can be older brothers. These people think, I'm here. In fact, I'm here all the time. I have checked that box that says, make God happy and earn points. That's me. I've done it. Your love, if you're an older brother, your love for brothers and sisters who don't measure up has gone cold. Just like these Pharisees looked at the people Jesus was talking to, and just like the older brother looked at the younger. This is another piece of evidence that indicates we might be Pharisees, we might be older brothers, and that is our impatience and judgmental attitude directed at those who do not measure up to my standards, which I myself do not keep consistently. But don't talk to me about that. We're talking about this guy over here. Finally, another characteristic of an older brother type is this one. Reward for works makes perfect sense to you. You think acceptance by the Father is based on your resume rather than your relationship. It's not. It's now clear what Jesus is saying. And I've got it on this next slide. I know it's a lot of words, so pull out your camera and take a picture of it. It is now clear what Jesus is saying. The younger brother, the tax collectors, and the other notorious sinners were legitimately morally bad people. They were lost, but now repentant and found and delighting in God's lavish grace. The older brother and the scribes and the Pharisees were outwardly morally good. They looked good. Yet they were lost, depending on their own self-righteousness to save them rather than repenting and recognizing their need of God's lavish grace to save them and make them found, as well as the coin and the sheep. You know, it was these notorious sinners that came to listen to Jesus. The Pharisees and scribes complained about it. And really, this took place in Luke chapter 15. In the chronological course of Jesus' ministry, we're getting close to the end. And actually, a few days later from this event, Jesus basically is saying, I've given you guys so many opportunities. He now has this to say to them. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! On the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. We kind of go, yeah, Jesus, we've been waiting for you to say that for 3 years. But he didn't say it until now, because he kept extending opportunity after opportunity for them to hear who he was, examined by his works and by what he said. They didn't do it. They just wanted to get rid of him. And a few days later, they were going to try that. Finally, how are we accepted by God the Father? How are we accepted? Not by earning it, but by humbly receiving his extravagant and lavish grace made possible for us through the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus Christ. That is how we gain acceptance to God our Father. No matter where we are in the younger brother, older brother continuum, it doesn't matter. If you do this, if you humbly say, Jesus, you paid it all. You paid it all. You paid it all for me. Jesus is the perfect older brother who seeks and saves the lost. Father in heaven, we come to you and say thank you for making the message brilliantly clear for us now. But even then, they got it, and they didn't like it. But some loved it. Some came to you in droves and said, Jesus, teach us more. Tell us more. We want to follow you. We want to be with you. And Jesus, that's our prayer too. We want to follow you well. And we want to be with you forever. Thank you that you made that possible. We praise you in your own name.